For decades, a PhD in economics was a golden ticket to job stability. It promised a path to tenure or, at worst, a lucrative job at a central bank, a think tank, or the tech industry. Not anymore. The economics job market is now in total freefall, and the profession's own data proves it. And we know the data proves it because the economics profession has a bizarrely centralized hiring ritual where once a year in the fall, every employer posts job openings at the same time and every candidate applies at the same time. And so the entire profession runs through one central clearinghouse because the profession is obsessed with efficient job markets. And their job market is called the American Economics Association's Job Opening for Economists. And this data, which is crystal clear, makes the economics PhD market uniquely measurable. And the numbers that we're going to walk through today are just brutal. I published this article on my Substack back in 2025. You can find it linked in the description of this video. And at the time, we were in the middle of the job market. So we can see how the market was doing in the middle of the job market. And here, the purple line is 2022, when there were nearly 1,500 job openings for PhD economists. And then the next year, there was 1,200, the next year, 1,100. And in 2025, this yellow line here at the bottom, we were on pace for about 1,000 jobs, which would be about a 35% decrease in just 3 years. And so I extrapolated this data using Microsoft Paint. And at the time, there were economists on Twitter that made fun of me for this method. For example, Chris Blattman at the University of Chicago made fun of me for using my projections in Microsoft Paint. But when the job market ended just a few months ago now, we can see that my projections were pretty much 100% perfect. The data that I just showed you is just for academic jobs. So here's the final data for all jobs for economists in 2025. So it includes academia, government, industry, tech, consulting. And you can see 2025 is the worst year ever, even worse than COVID year, which was a down year. So 2025 compared to just 2024, jobs were down 21%. And then the year before then, they were down 26%, 40%, 35%, 42%. So just like in the past 5 or 6 years, economics job postings are down 42.4%, meaning the demand for PhD economists over just the past 5 or 6 years is down by 42%. Most econ PhD students aren't just looking for any job, though. They didn't go to school for 5 or 6 years just to work in consulting or to work in data science. What they want is tenure track jobs in academia. According to polling data from the 2025 webinar on the Econ PhD job market, 94% of candidates are very interested in, above all else, becoming an assistant professor on the tenure track. So when we restrict our data to just look at tenure track jobs at four-year universities, it gets much more grim because here in this chart, we can see in 2020 and 2021, there were about 800 tenure track jobs at full-time academic tenure track jobs. And now in 2025, this red line at the bottom, it's down to 333 tenure track jobs. So that pool of jobs that are most in demand has shrunk by more than 50%. One big driver of this fewer jobs in 2025 has been that traditionally, one of the main employers of econ PhDs has been the federal government. So even if it's less glamorous, economists could still get hired at the Federal Reserve, Treasury, Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the Congressional Budget Office. But Trump has put in place a hiring freeze and budget cutbacks, and they're just not hiring any economists anymore, as shown in this chart. Another traditional escape hatch for econ PhDs who failed the academic job market is to work at international organizations like the IMF or the World Bank. And again, there's been hiring freezes at these organizations as well, basically due to Trump freezing their funds. Outside of academia or the government or NGOs, the tech industry used to provide a reliable fallback option as well, where tech giants like Amazon, Microsoft, Netflix, or Airbnb built entire teams of economists to optimize their pricing models and to design experiments and to model consumer behavior. But that avenue has begun to shrink as well because tech hiring, which exploded during the pandemic, has totally collapsed, and demand is not just weak, but it's structurally below the trend amount where it was before COVID, as firms are automating more of their work that junior economists used to do. So, like, what can a junior economist do really that ChatGPT can't do? The only seemingly stable landing spot left for economists is in banking and finance, but here demand is still stagnant and remains well below pre-pandemic trend. So counterintuitively, most private sector banks and investment firms don't really rely heavily on hiring econ PhDs. There are some jobs for them, but they prefer MBAs and statisticians or computer scientists, and PhDs in economists are really like kind of niche hires at these banks, even if those are the only stable jobs left. While demand for econ PhDs plummets, supply is rising every year. So, according to a 2024 NSF survey of doctorate recipients, 1,385 Americans earned econ PhDs in 2024, which was more than in 2023, which was more than in 2022, and more than in 2021. Meaning you now have about 1,400 brand new PhD students every year chasing about 333 tenure track jobs. And at first glance, that ratio is not actually too catastrophic, but the catch is that they're competing against an international cohort of econ PhDs as well. So every year, American universities hire from London, Oxford, Cambridge, Toronto, Paris, Barcelona, China, etc. And that pool, as shown by this chart here, is rising every year as well. Furthermore, the new graduates aren't just competing against their new cohort every year, they're thrown in the same bucket of leftovers from every prior cycle. So, postdoctorate students clinging to hope, visiting professors who are chasing job stability, lecturers who are desperate to upgrade to assistant professors, and assistant professors stranded at second tier schools who want to upgrade to first tier schools, meaning that the new supply every year of fresh PhD students is just the visible tip of the iceberg. The true applicant pool is a rolling backlog several times larger. The result is last year, a pool of 5,341 candidates which participated in the job market, which, as shown on this chart here, the dark blue line at the top, is the largest applicant pool ever recorded. Yet, the American Economic Association survey of the labor market found that only 99 fresh PhD students secured a tenure track job in America. That is a 7% placement rate for American PhD students, meaning that if 100 PhD students spend 6 years of their lives chasing this credential, only about 7 of those 100 will get a placement rate in a tenure track job. But that actually understates the severity of the problem as well, because these jobs are not evenly distributed. You have a very good chance or a much higher chance of earning a tenure track job if you go to Harvard or MIT or Stanford or Chicago or Princeton or Yale or Berkeley. But if you go to a school outside the top 10, the odds of landing a tenure track job are significantly less than 5%. So think of all like the hundreds of state schools and schools that are not in the top 10 where all these students are wasting their 6 years of their prime of their life at the hope of getting a tenure track job. And in reality, they have a significantly lower chance than 5% of landing that tenure track job. So it's kind of a scam. I've identified 4 structural reasons behind the decline of demand for economics professors. And number one, obviously, is the rise of artificial intelligence, which is eating away at all jobs. And number two is the declining undergraduate enrollment in economics. So, for example, the University of Oregon recently tweeted out their department's own data showing a steady fall in the number of declared econ majors, which is translated into fewer degrees being handed out, which means they need fewer professors. This matches up with nationwide statistics, which confirm the trend. The number of students graduating with econ degrees is now slipping after decades of steady growth. So there's fewer economics degrees being handed out nationwide to undergrads, and therefore they need fewer economics professors to teach those fewer students. Number three is the looming demographic cliff, which I put on the screen here. And what this shows is that after the recession in 2007, 2008, people started having fewer kids because they couldn't afford them. And so those children that would have existed are turning 18 now, and there's fewer 18-year-olds going off to college, meaning not just econ degrees overall, but all university undergrads overall. There's fewer of them, so they need fewer professors. And the final reason is I think the economics profession really discredited itself by lying about inflation over the past few years. So if you were there during the pandemic, you remember the money printing, and you remember how at first economists promised that printing money wouldn't fuel inflation. And then as it was happening, economists said it was transitory. And then finally, after prices rose, economists were gaslighting the population that it wasn't a big deal and it wasn't happening at all. And so ordinary people who watched their rent and their groceries and their gas bills skyrocket, they saw a profession that was more invested in protecting democratic policy narratives than it was in telling the truth. And the result is torching of trust. People just don't trust economists that much anymore. And so is an economics PhD still a good deal in 2026? The answer is no. It might be a good investment if you go to Harvard or MIT or Chicago, but for everyone else, the degree is a trap where you spend 6 years of your life grinding for a credential that leaves you overeducated, underpaid, and locked out of the profession that you trained to join. Because, again, unless you go to Harvard, there's less than a 5% chance that you land a tenure track job. And so, how do we fix this? I think the only real way to fix it would be if the economics profession banded together, kind of like into a cartel, and coordinated to radically restrict the supply of economics PhDs to fix the oversupply problem. But without that discipline, which I don't think is going to happen, the system is going to keep flooding the market with tons of useless doctorates who can't get jobs in their profession, which makes it essentially a Ponzi scheme destined to collapse under its own weight. If you have an economics PhD and you regret it, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you have an 18-year-old going off to college, maybe send them this video and advise them not to get an economics PhD. Thank you very much. And if you like this video, please become a subscriber. This is kind of a new channel, so every subscriber helps me a lot, and I really appreciate you. Thank you.